Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leigh Maingard. I'm the CEO of Intersect Sectional Title Services. Welcome to our 10th training session, of the year. Good to see everybody back. Some old faces there. Thank you for joining us again. I hope you will find this training session worthwhile and informative. So this evening, we're going to talk about how trustees can effectively navigate daily challenges. So when I thought about the training session, I thought that it would be a good idea. To just give some general feedback, maybe, or some advice or suggestions on how trustees can try and navigate, the difficulty of being trustees and dealing with the issues of a body corporate. I just want to quickly check that we've got everybody can hear me. Well, if there's anybody that can't hear me, everything is certainly set up on my side. But just put something in the chat box if you don't mind, and we can have a look and see if there's an issue. Just for everybody's information, everybody's on mute. So if you do have a question, please put in the chat box. And when I'm finished, I will then have a look at the chat box and see what questions or comments there are. And then if we still have time within the hour, we can certainly have a look at that and have a quick discussion around that. So how can trustees navigate the daily challenges that they face in managing their scheme? So we're going to look at a couple of specific topics this evening. Firstly, we're going to quickly have a look at the trustee and managing agent relationship. And I think it's very important that we look at this first, because the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act certainly makes it very, very clear that the management of a sectional title scheme is the responsibility of the trustees. But bodies corporates obviously have managing agents, not necessarily all of them. There are many schemes that self-manage, that don't have a managing agent or have that relationship. But I think it's very important that we have a look at that before we even start with the rest of the evening. The second topic we're going to talk about is striking the right balance of responsibilities amongst trustees. We're going to have a look at authorizing invoices and payments. We're going to have a look at overseeing contractor work. We're going to look at addressing resident grievances. And then we're going to finish off with equitable and accurate application of the scheme's rules. So the trustee and managing agent relationship is contractual of nature. If you look at the bottom of that slide, you'll see there the managing agent. There's a contractual relationship with the trustees of the body corporate. But let's have a look at what the trustees' responsibilities are. And this is just a short excerpt from the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, where it clearly says that the trustees are responsible to meet and carry out the business of the scheme. So those will be your trustee meetings where an agenda is put forward. The trustees look at maintenance issues, they look at the finances of the scheme, and then they look at any other issues that come up during the time from one trustee meeting to the next. They are responsible for exercising the body corporate powers and functions. If you do have the time and you're inclined to go and look at the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, you'll see that there's a pretty hefty section that deals with body corporate powers and functions, which is very, very important for trustees to understand. They're also responsible for applying the funds of the scheme according to the budgets. So when we talk about budgets, we talk about the administrative budget, and then we also talk about the maintenance reserve and replacement budget. They are responsible for appointing an agent or any agent, and as well as employees of the body corporate. And then interesting responsibility is that they are responsible for compiling the trustee meeting and any other general meetings of the scheme. And why this is interesting is because trustee meetings, at a trustee meeting, the managing agent should be invited to the meeting. It's not the managing agent is not obligated to be at that meeting, although contractually managing agents do sign up to attend the trustee meetings. And there's obviously a various obvious reason why the managing agent goes to the trustee meeting, so that they can understand what's going on in the scheme. They can follow through on any action points from the trustee meetings. And then obviously they also do the trustee meeting minutes. But just for the record, the trustees are actually responsible for compiling the meeting minutes. So the point to be made here is that the relationship between the trustees and the manager is of a contractual nature, and the trustees can write into that management agreement with the consent of the managing agent what responsibilities they will fulfill. But it's always important to understand and know that the trustees can never cede any responsibility that they have in terms of the act to the managing agent. So the managing agent cannot be responsible for something that the trustees are responsible for, and they, for instance, made a decision or took a decision for something that needed to get done in the scheme, in the managing of the scheme. So the second topic is the balance of responsibilities amongst trustees, and I think this is fundamental in terms of how the trustees conduct their business. But it goes further than just at the time when the trustees have been appointed and they get to the first trustee meeting. So the points I made is when trustees are elected, you know, we've certainly seen in many schemes, especially when there are personal agendas or, you know, owners have a dislike for a certain trustee or vice versa, where people with a suitable skills are not considered or voted in as trustees. And there can be many reasons, and, you know, for that. But I think what is important for owners as well as trustees that are in the position of trustees at the time is to consider the people that are elected or nominated. Firstly, are they actually suitable for the role? And the reason why I raise that is because we find that people put their hands up to be trustees, to fill those positions, and they very quickly, you know, just kind of disappear into the background. And you find that, you know, you've got 5 or 7 trustees, you find that maybe 2 or 3 trustees are really doing all the work. And you find trustees that have put their hands up to get involved in the scheme and the management of the scheme, kind of just become, if you want to call it, keyboard warriors, where they'll just say yes or no to every instruction or request or whatever that comes through on an email, but they don't actually actively get involved in the management of the scheme. So what would be a suitable trustee? You know, we'll get to that shortly, but what is important to consider is that those people that are prepared to be trustees, do they have any credentials or skills that will benefit the scheme? And obviously, the most common thing would be somebody that has financial background, or that operates or has a business, or is involved in a company or business that's financially orientated. People that can understand how financials work, management accounts, those kind of scenarios, and then also people that have, you know, that are inclined to understand maintenance, that can meet a contractor on site, and the contractor can explain to him what the problem is in the building or whatever, and they can understand that, and then have a discussion with the contractor, so that when they go back to the trustees, that they can actually explain why they believe what the contractor is suggesting is in fact correct. So those are the kind of skills that come to mind. Another one would be somebody that's maybe you know, in their own business or own company that they work for, is an HR manager, for instance. So it's important to consider the people that are being put forward as trustees or nominated, that they actually bring a benefit or can make a benefit, can be beneficial to the scheme, and bring value to the board of trustees. And then something else, and this is in fact something that a lot of people ask at trustee meetings, because we do see that more and more trustees that are put forward for election don't necessarily live in the scheme anymore. And it becomes very difficult for trustees to know exactly what's going on in the building when they're actually not living in the scheme. And we'll see as we go through the evening is that it becomes very problematic, because then a lot of the responsibility lies with the trustee that lives in the scheme, because you might find a trustee that's been tasked or asked to do something, but they don't live there, and then they keep on asking the resident trustee to go and have a look at something or meet a contractor, etc., etc., and that becomes very it becomes difficult for the person that lives there, and it certainly will start breaking their spirit when they are continuously contacted or asked to meet with people or go and look at things while they're trying to have a peaceful afternoon, or on the weekend, or maybe in the evening after a long day's work. So it's important to always consider, the people that are put forward, are they actual residents? And those people that aren't residents, what can they bring to the table that will be beneficial? And then, as I mentioned, as I started, is that are there personal agendas when trustees are nominated or elected? And unfortunately, that does happen. Whatever the situation is in the past or going forward, but we certainly do see that quite often. And I think it's important to also kind of not necessarily get involved in these personal feuds, but to understand what they're all about, especially those people that do want to become trustees, and those people that have been there in the past, and to look past that, because at the end of the day, the trustees are there to serve the members of the scheme and the body corporate as a whole. So how do you kind of treat the responsibilities among trustees? And the reason why this is always something that we suggest trustees have a look at when they have the first trustee meeting is because of what I mentioned, is that you always find eager people at meetings, but then the reality kicks in and the trustees need to start doing work and they need to get their hands dirty. And inevitably you always find, well, not necessarily always, but you do find that the chairman always bears the brunt of it. He's normally carrying the most work to get done. He's the guy that always communicates with the managing agent or the contractors or the staff. So we always make a suggestion that they try and break up the portfolios into areas like, for instance, like portfolios like financial, maintenance, security, gardening, if the body corporate's got employees, a trustee that maybe deals with complaints from owners, depending on how big the scheme is. And then also I've put in the last one, legislation, i.e. rules. And obviously there can be other portfolios as well. Every body corporate is not the same, and every building is not the same, and every estate is not the same. So there could certainly be more portfolios added to that. But the point here is that it's important that trustees at the first meeting actually put out the portfolios, and then each person that, well, not necessarily each trustee, but the trustees that are suitable for each position are then put in that position to run with whatever their portfolios. And in that way, the workload is then shared between all the trustees. If something comes through to the security trustee, for instance, then everybody else knows they don't have to get involved up until the point where the security trustee then reverts back to the rest of the trustees and then gives feedback. And then if there's a decision that can be made, at least the trustees can make an informed decision based on what the security trustee has come forward with. And that goes further than that as well, where if you have seven, let's say for instance, 7 trustees, and nobody really knows what their role is, and everybody's kind of doing everything, the volume of communication via email just becomes almost unbearable and very, very difficult to follow. And everybody's got his own input, and everybody wants to put his, give his own input and stuff like that. And, we certainly believe, I certainly believe that the volume of emails between trustees in making decisions can certainly be a lot less if everybody knows exactly what their position is within that board of trustees, and everybody knows exactly their role and what they are responsible for. And then the last point I've made there is subcommittees for ad hoc projects. So the trustees are entitled to create subcommittees where they can bring in people from outside. In other words, when I say people from outside, other owners that are in the scheme, you know, as a board of trustees, you might not necessarily have the skill set, let's say, for instance, to deal with a roofing project, but there's a person that lives in the complex that's got a roofing business, for instance, or they engineer or something like that. So the trustees can certainly create subcommittees for these kind of projects on an ad hoc project. So one of the trustees will run with the project, or be the leader of that subcommittee, but he will get one or two other owners to assist him in running that project. And when the project is complete, the other two owners will obviously just fall away, and they won't be involved in any other activities of the trustees. So those are just simple examples of what trustees can do to lessen the load of work that is generally placed on trustees when dealing with a scheme in general. Right, authorizing invoices and payments. Again, one of the reasons I put it here is because it is problematic for various reasons. So one of the reasons, I'm going to start almost at the bottom of that slide where we talk about the online management system. So Intersect uses WeConnectU. Not everybody that's got access to the system necessarily likes it or actually likes going onto it. And every scheme is different. You know, you have big schemes, you have smaller schemes, you've got medium-sized schemes. Some trustees prefer to send an email confirming that they're happy for an invoice to be paid. Some owners insist that they do it. Well, so not owners, but some trustees insist that they first authorize and second authorize payments, which is obviously something that we promote because it does become a self-management kind of tool. And also the trustees then take responsibility for something that they are responsible for by checking invoices, checking that the general ledger codes that we use are in fact correct, et cetera, et cetera. So going back to the top there, you've got two scenarios are broken up into two scenarios. One is the monthly invoices. So when we talk about monthly invoices, we talk about things like, for instance, the City of Cape Town invoices, your monthly security, the lift maintenance contracts, cleaning contracts, your garden contracts, if you've got gardeners in place, salaries and wages. Normally managing agents don't necessarily do the payroll or the HR side of payments in-house. They might outsource it like we do to an HR consultant. But those are monthly expenses which the body corporate has budgeted for, and they know they're going to incur it every month. So those are kind of payments that the trustees don't really have to get involved in. So those are things that generally there's a mandate in place or resolutions signed by the trustees where they give the managing agent the authority to pay the list of monthly invoices that the body corporate must incur for contractors. I think more important here is the ad hoc maintenance or invoices that goes along with ad hoc maintenance. And the reason for that is because you know, every now and then there's a situation where a plumber needs to be called out or electrician needs to be called out, or there's a problem on the roof. And those are not monthly expenses that you necessarily expect to incur every month. So the problem here is that when those ad hoc costs come through, or firstly when the issue has been established, you know, who's going to meet the contractor on site? Who's going to check the work once the contractor has actually done the work? Because the trustees obviously cannot approve the payment of an invoice if they're not satisfied with the work that was done. So in this case, if you have a maintenance trustee, whatever the setup is within the scheme, the maintenance trustee will then be responsible to check the work. And then he will say, listen, guys, I've checked the work. He sends an email to the rest of the trustees, and he says, I'm happy to authorize this payment. The second trustee will then authorize it, and then the managing agent can then proceed to pay the invoice. I've made put a question mark there behind the resident trustee. As per the previous slide, when you have a resident trustee that is maintenance inclined or that has the maintenance portfolio, it is obviously beneficial for the scheme because that trustee can then go around, you know, even if it's after work, go and have a look at the work that the contractor has done, or maybe meet the contractor there, depending on, you know, if they're still employed or not. And then if they're happy with the work, they can then go back and say, listen, guys, I'm happy with the work, and then proceed. So it's important, again, when the trustees are put together, that if there's a resident trustee, that they probably deal with the maintenance more than anything else. And then the last point on the ad hoc maintenance, although it's not an ad hoc maintenance, yes, it's going to happen every now and then, but it's certainly going to happen, every couple of years, or 5 or 6 or 7 years. And I'm more thinking about a redecoration of a scheme where the building is repainted. Another one would be a lift refurbishment or lift modernization. In those instances, the trustees wouldn't necessarily be that involved or required to check up on the work that gets done. Intersect ourselves, we prefer that when a project is quite intricate, and you have difficulties where you've got engineers involved and those kind of things, we prefer to suggest to our clients that they outsource the project management. And then those project managers obviously then effectively work for the body corporate. So they've got the know-how, and they've got the expertise to understand what's happening on site, and they can then report back to the trustees, after which they will then sign off on invoices, etc., etc. So on major projects, trustees don't really need to be involved that much. But again, some schemes prefer to do it themselves. Again, if you have a trustee that's an engineer, and the major project that's being done is of that kind of nature, there's nothing wrong with that person then being involved. Obviously, there's quite a big responsibility on that person then, because they need to sign off the project. And certainly if you're talking about big projects, you start talking about liabilities and all those kind of things. So it might not necessarily be something that an individual wants to take on, certainly not as a trustee. And that's why project managers that have got all the necessary insurances in place that can cover any issues that follow the completion of the project is probably a much better way to go. So ad hoc, you've got a maintenance trustee that lives on site. That's really probably the easiest and the simplest solution of dealing with that aspect of authorizing invoices and payments. And then the processing, as I mentioned, some trustees, some bodies corporate prefer to, confirm something in an email. The issue from a managing agent perspective is that, again, if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 trustees, you get seven emails, 7 different emails to confirmation of the payment of an invoice, for instance. So that's why We Connect You is such a good system for us, because once that invoice has been loaded, if the trustees, although the invoice is loaded, the trustees still have the responsibility to go and authorize those payments. So only once that's done will the actual payment be made. So we prefer that system. But again, it really depends on each body corporate how they want to manage their affairs. So overseeing contractor work, I've touched on it a little bit now. I've broken it up into two different kinds of schemes. Schemes with a building or estate manager. Estate manager would obviously be more on a HOA side, homeowners association, and then schemes with no building managers or estate managers. So where you've got a building manager or estate manager, you'll obviously have a service level agreement or contract of employment. And it would certainly make sense. And if it's not in there, then it should be changed. But that building manager or estate manager will be responsible in terms of their contract of employment to then meet with contractors, obtain quotations, submit that to the trustees. Any questions or queries that trustees have based on those quotations that have been presented, the building manager will then obviously deal with those queries. So in the case where there's a building manager, estate manager, the responsibility of overseeing contractor work becomes less of a trustee function, but more of a building and an estate manager function. And then obviously, once the work's been done, the building manager will take on the responsibility to check the work. Once they're happy with it, they will then basically pre-authorize the work or the invoice, and then go back to the trustees and say, guys, I'm happy with the work. I'm happy that you authorize it. And then it's easy for the trustees to then just do a second authorize and then give that instruction to the managing agent to proceed. So that's obviously a pretty simple solution, but not all bodies corporates are that large or big enough to actually have the option of having a building manager. So it's really just where it's possible to have something like that, where it's easy for the trustees. So I think the situation that we have more often than not is where the scheme doesn't have a building manager, and the responsibility does then fall on the trustees. The first point I made is managing agent service level agreements. We find it very often that trustees or owners will ask us, but aren't you responsible for the maintenance? The question really is that what does the service level agreement say that the managing agent has with the body corporate? If the managing agent hasn't signed themselves up contractually to be responsible for that, then there's no obligation the managing agent to go to site to look at the work and to approve it. And I do think that more often than not, it's a really risky thing for the managing agent to go to site and on the basis of the managing agent approving it to say to the trustees that they're happy with the work. So you'll probably find that manager agents in general would defer that to the trustees. And again, that's why we go back to the next point there, the maintenance trustee, that person, hopefully they're a resident, they can quickly go and have a look or meet the contractor on site and then authorize the work. But the problem here is that you've got your maintenance trustee. If it's somebody that's not retired, somebody that has a normal 8 to 5 job, that they have to do these kind of things after hours or maybe on a Saturday morning or something like that. So it's not ideal. But unfortunately, those are the kind of things that trustees sign up for. And then certainly the maintenance trustee would then need to understand that they'll probably be required to do that. Another option is where a scheme doesn't have a building manager, and again, we're talking about cost here, is where you have an external consultant or contractor that's on a retainer that takes responsibility for the maintenance at the scheme. So a scenario here would be is that where you find a contractor, a general contractor, if you want to call it that, somebody that can do plumbing maintenance, electrical maintenance, obviously with the certified artisans. So you have to have a plumber or plumbers that are certified, electricians that are certified. To then what they do, so the body corporate will pay them a monthly retainer. For that retainer, they either go to the building once every week or every 2 weeks. They do a report for the trustees, and in that report, they then break down the issues that they see in the scheme or on the building, and they then put forward proposals or suggestions of how to resolve the issue or put forward pricing that the trustees can then approve. So you have a contractor then takes responsibility, and that takes away a lot of responsibility from effectively having a maintenance trustee. Although that person or that contractor would need to report to the trustees or to somebody within the trustees so that the trustees can understand what they're authorizing, if that's even required at all. The next one is addressing resident grievances. So I think this is quite an interesting portfolio, if you want to call it that. And I think it more has to do with resident trustees, where owners in the scheme know that one of the trustees lives in the complex. And I think the point here really is that when you are a resident trustee and there are complaints in the scheme, and obviously you get different kinds of schemes. You get schemes where the people are extremely active. There's a continuous turnover of tenants. There's noise levels. There's screaming and shouting. There's loud music. Whatever you can imagine that happens in the scheme. But if a trustee is known in the scheme, the problem is that person, do people come to the trustee's door and knock on the door and complain to that person? So I think that's the premise of this slide. And what I really wanted to do here is kind of just give some suggestions of how it can be dealt with. So I think the very first thing is that within the trustees, they need to establish a process for people that want to complain, and they want to lodge complaints, how they do that. Because I think it's important for people to know processes, because if they understand that there are processes, then they'll probably follow that. But if they're not led to understand how things work within the scheme, then it becomes a free-for-all. People go knock on the doors at 11, 12 o'clock at night. And it does become an extremely inconvenient thing specifically for residents, for trustees, that live in the scheme. So the process of lodging complaints, be very specific. Can you log it with a trustee that's responsible for receiving the grievances, or must it go directly to the managing agent? And also just understand that even if it goes directly to the managing agent is purely going to probably just forward that on to the trustees or to the trustee that's responsible for dealing with grievances. But I think establishing a process that everybody can understand and knows what to follow is extremely important to do. The second point there, accept complaints from tenants or via owners only. The relationship between a body corporate and residents is that the body corporate really only has, from a technical perspective, only has a relationship with the owners. So the directive is that, especially when managing agents get complaints from residents, from tenants, is that they always refer them back to the owner and let the owner put through the complaint to the managing agent, who can then deal with that in whichever way they feel is the right way to deal with. And again, it goes back to, if you've got a resident trustee, you've got tenants knocking on the door, it can become quite a full-time job, which obviously nobody really wants to do. So the third point there, resident trustees refer complainant to the scheme process. If there's a process in place, even when somebody comes and knocks on the door, you can very politely say, listen, this is the email address, please send your complaint, then we'll deal with it tomorrow morning or after the weekend or whatever the scenario is. The fourth one there is also quite important, is that you do find in schemes where trustees are biased towards their friends, people that they've known for a long time that live in the scheme, and they're also biased towards their enemies, people that over time they've become unfriendly with. And I think it's very important to be aware of these kind of things. And then the last 2 points that really directly links to that is that trustees must always remain fair and reasonable, and they must remain consistent with their decisions. So you can't, for your friends, say that it's fine, you can make a noise, loud music till 12 o'clock, but when the person that you don't really have a liking for, the music's still playing at 11:05, you immediately knock on the door and you tell him to obviously put the music down. So being a trustee responsible for grievances is not for light-hearted person. It's got to be taken with the seriousness it requires. But the trustee and the trustees ultimately need to remain fair and reasonable, and they must always be consistent in whatever decisions they make, and not to be found biased towards somebody specifically. The next slide is the equitable and accurate application of scheme rules. I think this also really speaks to the previous slide that we had a look at. But yeah, more specifically, we're talking about the scheme rules, and I've also brought in homeowners associations. Although homeowners associations are obviously not subject to the Schemes Management Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. It's not the same as a sectional title scheme. So where we talk about rules for bodies corporates, we talk about the constitution for the HOA. So again, that in the trustee portfolio, somebody must be responsible for let's call it discipline or disciplinary action that must be taken against owners and residents. It's not something that is generally done. What we find is that complaints will come through. It will come through to, let's say, the trustee that's responsible for dealing with complaints. the managing agent will get an instruction to write to the owner, providing them with the complaint that was received. But we don't really find too many trustees where the portfolio is actually broken up, where there's actually somebody that deals with the rules of the scheme and the implication or the application of those rules. So again, if there's a sufficient number of trustees in the scheme, then it's great to have something like that, especially in bigger schemes. And having said that, we have schemes with 200-300 sections, not 300 necessarily, but close to 200 sections where we only have 3 trustees. So, even in that case, where you think you've got a big scheme where there should be lots of people that want to be trustees, you don't necessarily have that situation. So the first point is, if there's sufficient trustees and there's somebody that can deal with that, then it'd be great to appoint somebody for that. In homeowner associations, you have different scenarios, and again, constitutions for homeowner associations literally vary from the one HOA to the next. It's not you don't have a prescribed constitution like you have prescribed management rules and conduct rules. So every HOA's constitution must be checked to see if they even make a provision for disciplinary committees. But in well-run HOAs where the constitutions have been amended to include those things, you will find, or you should find, disciplinary committees. And then there's quite a long process where that has to be followed, where disciplinary committee will meet with the person where the complaints come from, and then make a judgment call and say, listen, you are guilty. We are going to fine you for for whatever the transgression in terms of the Constitution. What is important though is for the trustees to understand the legislation and the rules of the body corporate. We find quite often that people want to fine owners or apply penalties and charges on the levy accounts when there's been absolutely no consultation between the body corporate, being the trustees, and the person that's transgressed the rules. So it's extremely important to understand for trustees, generally, 1, to understand legislation, and then 2, the rules of the scheme. And if they feel that their scheme rules are not sufficient to cover these kind of topics or issues, then they should propose that the rules are amended to allow for fines to be imposed and certain restrictions to put in place. On a HOA, again, because the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act is not applicable to HOAs, if the Constitution allows for fines and penalties to be charged, then that can be charged to the owner's levy account. Sectional title, again, although the rules of the scheme, if it's been amended, may allow for those kind of things, there's still a process to be followed. And only once the person has been found guilty can the body corporate raise those fees. But it becomes a bit of a gray area, because in terms of sectional title, you're not allowed to charge anything to an owner's account that's not related to the levies or recovery of water and electricity, for instance, without their permission or an adjudication order or court order. And obviously an adjudication order is something that you get from CSOS. So again, there's a process involved. You've got to go to CSOS, open a case against somebody, go to CSOS, go through a mediation, and then ultimately go through an adjudication process where an adjudicator then makes an order. And if the body corporate is successful to get that adjudication order against the owner, then only can they go and charge certain fees on the owner's levy statement. I've mentioned this before. Trustees will always say fair and reasonable, and within the rules. And in the same case with the HOA, within the Constitution, we do see often that not necessarily often. Sorry, I mistake myself here, but not necessarily often. But we do see where bodies corporate believe that they've followed the right route of charging people for certain things, and they find themselves in front of CSOS, and CSOS then rules them to remove those costs from the owner's account. And then raising of fines, penalties on levy accounts. In a HOA, it would be subject to what the Constitution allows. And in sectional title, it will be subject to the scheme rules. And then obviously it's got to be with the permission of the owner, adjudication order, or court order. I think in summary, what I'm trying to say here is that the trustees, they've got a lot of responsibility. It's not an easy job. There's a lot of work to get done. But if the trustees are set up properly, where there's some thinking behind who the trustees should be, obviously you need somebody to put themselves forward to be a trustee, but that the right people are put in place, that the trustees put together a portfolio. Each one's got a role within the board of trustees, which means that one person can get on with the job, report back to the trustees, and then they make a decision. Instead of having 5 or 6 or 7 trustees and everybody kind of gets involved. Then the 1 month I'm involved in the security, the next month I'm not, then I'm involved in maintenance, etc., etc. So all of that kind of works together in regards to making decisions, communication between trustees, communication with the managing agents. And I also think it's important that the relationship with the managing agents also well documented in the service level agreement, and that there's no misunderstanding of who needs to do what and who's responsible for what needs to be done within the scheme. Right, so that brings us to the end of the session. I am going to have a look and see if anybody has maybe put any questions or comments on the chat. Okay, there's quite a lot. Let's have a look. We've got about 18 minutes, so let's have a look and see what comments have come through. Fine. Okay. If the manager agent is also an owner in the scheme, can the individual also be a trustee? Neil, yeah. So if you are a managing agent, but you are owning the scheme, yes, you can be a trustee. Who decides on the suitability of a trustee? In an AGM, you get nominated and there's a second, then you're a trustee. What is the wrong folk are nominated? So Neil, what I've seen in many schemes is that before the election of the trustees takes place, that the owners actually ask those people that have put themselves forward to potentially be elected as trustees to actually introduce themselves, give them a quick rundown of what they do, what business they're involved. It's almost like a little interview. So there's nobody specifically decides, but I think it's important that people at a meeting understand why they're choosing people and what they should be looking for. So I think to answer your question, I think whoever is put forward or who's ever put their name forward to be elected as a trustee should just introduce themselves so that the people can then make their own minds up in terms of who they want to choose. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen that often. So again, the whole session really is how things should be thought about, and not just, well, let's just fill the position of 5 trustees and there we go, and then everybody's happy. How many trustees should be elected? So Lucia, the minimum requirement is 2. The difficulty with having 2 trustees or an even number of trustees is that you're never going to have a majority vote. Remember that trustees take decisions on a majority vote. So we always say to trustees or to owners, have an uneven number. If you've got 5 trustees or 3 trustees, either 3 are going to vote. If there's 5 trustees, 3 are going to vote in favor or against something. So you're always going to have a majority vote there. The problem with having an even number of trustees is that if you've got a stalemate, in other words, you've got a 50-50 vote, the chairman is then responsible to make to cast a vote, and that unfortunately does put the chairman into a bit of a predicament, because if he's not in favor of something or he is in favor of something, then effectively the vote will be swung in his way, and which kind of indicates that he wanted something done or not done. So the answer is an uneven number. But there's no law. The minimum, the only thing that the law says, you can't have less than 2 trustees. Okay. What happens if there are not enough nominated trustees? So just quickly, the process in terms of the AGM agenda is that the first point when it comes to trustees is the first decision is how many trustees the body corporate wants. So you can't, we find too often that somebody will say, oh, we want 5 trustees. And then somebody will say in the background, well, how many nominations do we have? It doesn't really matter how many nominations you have. The first decision you've got to make is the number of trustees. So if you've decided that you wanted 5 trustees and everybody's happy with that, so just to add to that confusion is that if somebody says 5 and somebody says 7, you've got to vote on that. So that the members present will then have to vote on how many they want. So let's just say that 5 is then chosen by the owners. You then move to the point of electing trustees. Then at that point, the nominations are put forward. Let's use the example of, let's say they've decided they want 5 trustees, but you only have 3 nominations. We assume that those 3 owners, that everybody's happy to appoint them. Because you only have 3 nominations, you now effectively have to fill the other 2 positions. So what you do is you go to the floor, you say, are there any 2 other people that are prepared to be nominated as trustees? You're either going to have 2 people or 1 person that's prepared to stand as a trustee. You'll go through the process where if everybody's happy to appoint that person person then become a trustee. If there is nobody else, then the 3 trustees that were nominated will obviously be the trustees. You've already decided you want 5 trustees. It's then up to those 3 trustees to co-opt another 2 people after the AGM. So they can then go and approach something. Maybe there's somebody that somebody believes is suitable to be a trustee. They can add value. And then those trustees can approach that person after the fact and ask them if they want to be a trustee. They invite them to a trustee meeting, and at that meeting, it gets minuted that that person or people are then co-opted as trustees. Okay. Is there a list of responsibility for managing agents trustees? Yes, responsibilities of trustees. It's all in the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. And then for managing agents, as I said in the session, is that it's a contractual agreement. So if you want to know what the responsibility of the managing agent is, I suggest that you have a look at the management agreement or the service level agreement between the managing agent and the body corporate. Andy's asking, trustees are liable to the BC for financial losses incurred if the trustees fail to carry out their fiduciary duties. Instead of going to court, is there legislation in the pipeline when an individual BC member will be able to use CSOS to collect the debt from the errant trustees? Andy, so I can't speak from experience, but if a trustee has failed in its duties, an owner can take the trustee to CSOS and lodge a claim effectively against the owner. But again, you're then at the mercy of the adjudicator. At the end of the day, if the parties can't come to term, you're then at the mercy of the adjudicator to make an adjudication order against or for somebody, if for whatever that loss is. The issue with CSOS is that once you have an adjudication order, let's say, for instance, the body corporate or the owner wasn't successful in claiming back the money lost, then you would need to go to the High Court to actually defend that matter or try and get the matter overturned. So that can be quite a costly exercise. And vice versa, if you're going to go to an attorney, again, you're going to incur legal costs there. So CSOS, you can certainly approach them, but you might find that the trustee defends himself. You must also remember that the body corporate's got insurance for trustee liability. So, as an individual or the body corporate can potentially put a claim in against the body corporate insurance against the trustee liability for negligence. But in that case, the negligence would need to be proven as well for the insurance company to pay that out. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks for joining. Neil, should trustees' vote be done by secret ballot when making a decision? Then, Neil, no. What happens is that you get a voting card, and for record keeping, you need to on the voting card you need to put your name. And on the voting card will be the names of the trustees that have been nominated by the time that the meeting takes place. So unfortunately, it's not a secret ballot. It's on a voting card. And, you know, and also, like I said, for record purposes, because somebody needs to count the votes. So it needs to be, everything needs to be legal in terms of how many votes you've made, et cetera, et cetera. And also we have proxies and those kind of scenarios. So it's not by secret ballot, it's by voting card. Can voting be shown by hands or ballot? Look, the requirements of the Act is that there's voting cards issued. So the answer is it should be by ballot or voting card, because that's what the Act requires. All right. Oh wait. Okay. Sorry. Neil. Sorry. Let me just understand. Just these votes done by someone. Oh. So Neil, if I understand correctly, you're saying when trustees are making decisions, is that correct? When trustees are making decisions? Yes. Okay. So trustees at a trustee meeting. No, I mean, the voting has to be, I mean, obviously the only time when you have an issue with voting at trustee meeting is when a trustee is going to benefit from the decision that trustees make. Then obviously that trustee needs to excuse himself from that discussion, and you can't vote on the decision. So again, it's not a secret ballot. The trustees make decisions within their trustee meetings, and it's got to be recorded as well. So because the trustee decision, depending on what you're voting on, needs to be converted to a resolution effectively. Otherwise, you might have issues later on where people challenge the decisions that the trustees have made. So it must be, it can't be a secret ballot. Okay, pleasure. All right, guys, it's 22 minutes past. John has, we've got another 7 minutes. John has asked, can a replacement trustee be co-opted if a trustee resigns, or should they be voted on? Should the BC be made aware prior to the decision by the trustees? So obviously, trustees stand from one AGM to the next, but any trustee can resign at any time. So if I send an email tonight, I'm now resigning as a trustee of my body corporate. From tonight, I'm not a trustee anymore. So there's no notice period. You don't have to give a month's notice or anything like that. You immediately cease to be a trustee. It's then up to the trustees that remain to decide if they want to co-opt somebody for the remainder of that period. So obviously it depends on at what time during that financial year or that year the trustees are reduced. You know, you might find a situation, you know, people's lives change, people move, they go overseas, whatever the scenario is. You might find that you suddenly have an exit of 2 or 3 trustees, and suddenly you only have 2 trustees left. It would make sense for those 2 trustees to then try and find alternative trustees. So that's where they co-opt something. They actively have to go and contact somebody in the scheme and ask them if they want to join the board for the remainder until the next AGM. So it's not a voting process. It's up to the trustees to decide who they want. So you don't have a meeting now to vote those people in. The trustees co-opt that person, and then they automatically resign at the next AGM. And then you have the same process again. Nominations have to be received. People vote on the trustees, and then you follow the same process. Okay. I don't have any other questions. Just for everybody's information, the notes and the recording will be sent to everybody in the next day or two. So you will receive that via email. Henk has asked a question: when new matter arises during the general meeting, can voting be done by show of hands when ballot is not being prepared? So Henk, the agenda for an AGM is prescribed. Obviously, the trustees can add agenda items to the agenda, and the requirement is that when the meeting starts, the agenda has to be approved by the members. It's actually an agenda item. So the prescribed agenda in the sections I was given doesn't have a general line item. For some of the reason, bodies corporate put in general. So the way to really deal with any other business that's brought up at the meeting is to say to the people, please hold on to that thought. once the meeting is completed, we will then deal with that item that you've brought up, but it actually doesn't form part of the AGM unless somebody has specifically written to the trustees or the managing agent and specifically asked that an item is put onto the agenda. So it's very, very simple. If no other business has been received when the meeting starts or prior to the meeting, then it won't be discussed at the AGM, and it can be discussed, but only once the meeting has expired. If somebody has sent a notice to the trustee specifically asking for an item to be added, then the body corporate is obligated to put it on the agenda, and then it can be discussed. The voting part of that is something different because, you know, I can't even think of something where an owner has asked something to be put on where it must be voted on. So I can't really comment on the voting part of that. But again, if it's not on the agenda, can't be discussed, it's not part of the meeting. Can certainly be discussed in general conversation after the meeting's expired. On a voting side, you can't expect people to vote on something that they haven't been given the option to really consider. So it really depends on what you're voting on. But yeah, that's not as straightforward as the question may come forward. Arthur, one day when I'm retired, hopefully, but that's still a long way away. So, all right. Okay, we've got another 3 minutes. Thank you very much. I just want to thank you very much for everybody that joined. I hope it's been informative. We're 2 months away from the end of the year, so we've still got a November and a December training session that will come through. The December one will probably be early in the month because obviously people go on leave and won't necessarily be available. And you will receive a copy of the notes and the recording. So thank you for your time. Hope to chat to everybody soon, and thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.